Welcome. I am Shabbir Safdar. I'm the Executive Director of the Partnership for Safe Medicines. We're a nearly 2 decades old nonprofit coalition of members of the pharmaceutical supply chain. Patients, pharmacists, wholesalers, and manufacturers. Basically, if you make, distribute, handle, or take medicines from the factory floor to the patient, you're represented by somebody in the partnership. And our mission is to understand the safety of the drug supply chain. You can learn more at www.safemedicines.org, our website. Today, we're going to do a deep dive into the policy topic of Canadian and foreign drug importation. The idea that to address structural issues of healthcare costs in the US, we should buy bulk quantities of medicine from vendors in neighboring countries like Canada and others. As you might imagine, the nuances of this policy are far more complex than just driving a truck to another country and coming back with a pallet full of medicines. So we're going to go in depth today and learn a lot about it. Our panelists today are Christina Cella, a practicing hospital pharmacist and Chief Pharmacy Officer of the Canadian Society of Hospital Pharmacists. Andrea Thomas, a mom whose daughter was murdered by counterfeit pills and the organizer of the August 21st National Fentanyl Awareness and Prevention Day. Mark Baughman, a 35-year law enforcement veteran who worked for the DEA and the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office. Sheriff Scott Mellinger of Madison County, Indiana, and Dr. Kenneth McCall, a practicing pharmacist and professor of pharmacy at the University of New England in Portland, Maine. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And I'm going to start with Christina, because Christina, I have noticed that American policymakers who talk about Canadian drug importation often don't involve Canadians in that conversation or ask them what they think about this idea. So let me ask you first, what do Canadians think about this idea?
So in general, in short, we're not supportive of this idea. It's not something that we want to encourage at all because we're concerned about, our drug supply and want to make sure that our drug supply stays, sufficient for our population. So not supportive.
And is this the opinion just of pharmacists in Canada, or what other stakeholders are concerned about the impact on Canada of US bulk importing of Canadian medicines?
Yeah, no, not just pharmacists, certainly. The Canadian regulators, so Health Canada is concerned about bulk importation. Our distributors are concerned. And I would say that our manufacturers are concerned as well about these proposals because it's something that can risk our drug supply. And so there are many stakeholders that are not supportive at all. Like in general, I don't know that you would find any Canadian stakeholders that would be supportive of this idea in general.
And have patients also spoken up with concerns?
So with patients, yes, certainly, we have drug shortages here that are patient facing. And so those patients who have been directly impacted by drug shortages, when they hear about proposals to export medication from Canada into the US or import into the US, they are concerned. It's something that they see that they can't access the medications that they're looking for. And so when they hear that another country is looking to take more medications from Canada, it's something that's certainly of concern to patients.
So
Yeah.
you mentioned shortages. Tell us a little bit about sort of the structural differences between America and Canada and the shortage problem you have and how that plays into this conversation.
Absolutely. So most medications that are distributed for consumption or use in Canada are not actually made here domestically. So we do not have a very robust manufacturing process facilities here in Canada. And so about 70% of the drugs used in Canada are imported from other countries like the United States, like Europe, and other places like that. And so we don't have a very robust domestic manufacturing supply. So we rely on other countries to access our medications. And even for those medications that we do produce here in Canada, 90% of the raw ingredients are coming from foreign sources as well. So we are heavily reliant on foreign countries and foreign supply for our medications. And so because of that, when we're looking at proposals to export our drugs to other countries, it can risk our drug supply because we don't have a lot here and we can't make more necessarily easily because we're relying on the goodwill of other countries essentially to sell drugs to us.
And along with, let's say, the population difference between America and Canada, there's 9 of us for every one of you. You've also been experiencing drug shortages, I think pre-pandemic, yes?
Absolutely. So the real, if you were to look at a sort of a sentinel event that sort of signaled the advent of drug shortages here in Canada, we've been dealing with this for about 10 years now already. 2011, 2012, we had a plant in Quebec that supplied the vast majority of injectable opioids, so medications used for pain control in the hospital, had their plant closed down. We had significant shortages that directly impacted hospitals all across the country. And we've been dealing with drug shortages along these lines from that time. So over 10 years now, taking hours a day from pharmacy practice, from hospital pharmacy managers, community pharmacy practice, trying to find other sources of medications, trying to find therapeutic alternatives, et cetera, et cetera. This consumes a lot of our day. And so anything that can potentially increase drug shortages is of significant concern to us.
So I understand why you'd be concerned, already dealing with drug shortages for 10 years, and then along comes America, who's like, I know we have 9 times as many people as you do, but you don't mind if we just dip into your closet and take what we feel like we need. What have all the stakeholders said to the Canadian government, and what has the Canadian government said in response to your concerns about plans by
Yes.
Americans to do this?
Yeah, so the affected stakeholders in Canada have said to the government, like, this cannot happen. We need to do what we can to prevent this from happening, because we can't just make more. We can't just buy more, right? It's not as simple as, oh, our friends down south, we really want to help them, as we would love to do for many things. We can't do that with this because many distributors are contractually obligated to only supply the medications that they purchase at the price that they purchase from the manufacturers domestically. So it's not like they can purchase to resell. And if they were to start doing that, there could be implications on contracting within Canada and our ability to access medications for our patients, for our supply, because we could potentially be cut off if we're starting to order more and more medications. And so as a result of these concerns that were brought forward to Health Canada, and that Health Canada, the federal government, was aware of throughout the process, an interim order was put into place in November of 2020, which was made permanent in November of 2021. And it's called the Safeguarding Canadian Drug Supply, Safeguarding the Drug Supply order, essentially. And it prevents bulk exportation of any medication that could potentially be in shortage here in Canada. So this is a federal regulation that is incumbent upon the manufacturers or distributors. Anybody who is thinking of bulk exporting medications from Canada to another country has to satisfy the federal government that there is no possibility of this medication being in shortage before they provide this supply. So this is a federal rule that is on our manufacturers, which would be probably there's something similar. It's regulation for the companies, as you have in the United States. I think you have regulations around drug supplies as well.
So this seems pretty serious. Your top federal regulator has told all the distributors in Canada that they are not fond of this idea and put it in an order that would penalize them for exporting anything that might possibly be in shortage, which a lot of what you work with is in shortage.
Exactly. I mean, this is the discussion that was had. It's only things that could potentially be in shortage, but that's essentially every medication that could possibly come to the Canadian market could potentially go into shortage. And so essentially this acts as a more or less, I won't say permanent, but certainly a significant deterrent to the possibility of export of bulk medications from Canada into other jurisdictions.
I understand now that without the ability to make medicine domestically to replace it, you have no way to address a shortage if any medicine is taken out of your country, and then you would have an emergency and patients doing without. And clearly, if you could have solved it, you would have solved it in sometime in the last 10 years. It's an existing structural problem.
Yeah, I mean, drug shortage is multifactorial, so many possible reasons. It's so complex, both on the supply issue and on the demand issue. And so it is not an easy problem to solve. We're still actually, I meet regularly with Health Canada, not just myself, but many of the stakeholders that are sort of affected by this around drug shortages in general and trying to find solutions. And so this is something that is an ongoing problem that does not have an easy solution, and that we certainly want to make sure we're not exacerbating with any other issue, like any other things like this, essentially. So yeah, very complex though.
So before we leave you, I want to ask you one more question, which is that for a lot of Americans, their perception of the Canadian drug supply is typing Canadian pharmacy into Google and then looking up a website that's got a maple leaf flag on
Mhm.
it that's offering them cheap medicines. Are those really Canadian pharmacies that I'm finding?
No, they're not. I mean, I don't know if I'd put a number like 95, 99% of these websites are fake. What they're doing is they're trading on the good name, like the reputation that Canada has as being a place of safe medications, because we have safe medications and people wanting to look for inexpensive medications. And so these websites are not based in Canada. They're not based anywhere, probably in North America, to be perfectly honest. They're sourcing medications that are not approved by Health Canada or by the FDA. And more often than not, they're either counterfeit medications, they're unsafe, it's very risky for patients to buy medications from these websites. As much as they look like they're Canadian websites, they are not in any sense at all. Any pharmacy in Canada that sells, that kind of trades online, has to be regulated by one of the colleges of pharmacy within Canada. And so there are ways to kind of verify a website, but the vast majority on a Google search are not going to be those legitimate websites. And those pharmacies only sell to Canadians anyway, so that's another indicator.
Okay, so if I find a pharmacy online in Google that says it's a Canadian pharmacy and I'm an American and it sells to me, it can't be a real Canadian pharmacy.
No, no, it really can't. So,
Okay.
yeah.
That is great advice. I will remember that in Thanksgiving when I see my family and they tell me about the great savings they found. And a little later, we're going to talk to Dr. McCall about his experience actually ordering. But thank you, Christina, for your time. Let's move on to Mark Baughman. Mark, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for your service. I'm notably concerned, having just heard a Canadian talk about how they're not going to be able to sell us medication, that this might actually be an indication of how a black market develops, where people want things, they want to buy things, but they're not available from legitimate sources. And we kind of saw this during COVID-19 when there was a shortage of N95 masks and there were a lot of counterfeits flowing around. Can you explain a little bit more about illicit black markets and how supply issues create them?
It's exactly what we just said here, is that when there's items in need and they're not readily available, it gives organizations, underworld individuals, groups, allowing to make these counterfeit substances, masks, medications, test kits. During the height of the pandemic, we saw all that. You saw a lot of seizures of those. You saw things that weren't working. And likewise, comparatively speaking, you have a situation with pharmaceutical drugs that, as Christina said, aren't being manufactured in Canada. I think if I'm right, Canada only produces like 4% of the pharmaceuticals used in the world. So you have all these illicit pharmaceutical drugs that are now entering into the country that are not being vetted in any way. There's no legitimate wholesaler, that's Canadian wholesaler, that's allowing this to happen. So hence you have people thriving off of that with these counterfeit substances.
During the pandemic, I was watching this project called Operation Stolen Promise that Homeland Security and the other federal agencies were doing, where they were seizing enormous quantities of both fake pharmaceuticals, but also fake COVID products, masks, diagnostic tests, gloves, even surgical gowns that were not what they were supposed to be and didn't do what they were supposed to do. But what I noticed is that there were a lot more seizures than there were arrests of the people who were overseas sending them to us. And so I think that that's something I'd like to ask you about. Because of your 35 years in law enforcement, including the DEA, you've probably seen some of the challenges of prosecuting someone who, let's say, under a Canadian drug importation system, lives in Turkey and is set up a shell company that looks Canadian and is trying to sell us something that's actually turns out to be counterfeit. If we discover it's counterfeit and we want to arrest them, is that hard to do? I'm presuming, I'm not so naive to think that we just put 2 FBI agents on a plane, they land in Turkey, and then they go, with their handcuffs. Like, it's far more challenging than that.
It is far more challenging. Over the years when I was working with DEA as well as with Pinellas County Sheriff's Office, the end supplier, if they were an international end supplier, many times just went unidentified. It was just hard enough just to identify, much less after getting them identified, making sure there's comparable crime that exists in that country where our counterparts recognize us and want to help us, maybe in some form of an extradition process. That doesn't always bear out, and it's unfortunate. And you're putting the burden on another country and relying on them, and it's tough for them because they may not have the resources. DEA, one of the things that DEA is most proud of, I think, as a federal agency, is we have the largest footprint globally for all the federal agencies that are out there. But with that said, we still can't make the impacts and the inroads with some of these countries, especially the third world countries that have a hard enough time controlling the drug problem in their own area, and then relying on them to help us with ours.
So in essence, if we have somebody who, let's say in Turkey or India or China, who would sell us counterfeits through a Canadian shell company, we would have to, once we discovered it, we would have to actually investigate it in another country where we don't have any legal authority and convince the law enforcement agents there who, though they may be dedicated, may be under-resourced, to actually conduct the investigation with their legal powers for us, after which not all investigations are fruitful, right? Sometimes they hide their tracks really well and then try and get them out of the country into the US court. I'm correct that that's a huge challenge, isn't it?
It's tremendous. I mean, due process doesn't take effect until it's impacted the country, someone's in the country directly. What they're doing outside of the country, there are importation violations, of course, but enforcing them, getting a prosecutor to buy on board, a US prosecutor sometimes is hard, because they're wanting to make sure that, if they go and indict this individual, that ultimately, if in fact we identify them, that we're going to be able to successfully take them into custody through extradition processes. It's a long, arduous process. Sometimes these people manage to elude law enforcement for years, even though they may be wanted. Again, identifying them first and then ultimately getting them back here and relying on our counterparts to do so is a heavy burden for everybody.
So it would be fair to say that a lot of foreign criminals who are either trafficking illicit drugs or counterfeit medicines, as of today, probably never go punished because of their savviness of operating on foreign soil.
I would definitely say that's the vast majority of them do, especially with counterfeit substances as well. I mean, the fact that it's coming into the country and the people that are bringing it in, whether it's crossing the Canadian border, the southern border, whatever it may be, you have to have knowledge and intent. If they're representing it as someone else and the person crossing it believes that it's something that they're saying it is, even though it isn't, it's prosecuting an individual is going to be very difficult with the knowledge and intent purposes.
Yeah. All right, Mark, we're going to come back to you. I want to turn to you, Sheriff, and ask you a couple questions. First, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for your service. And I just want to ask you, Indiana's not been spared in any way from the crisis of fake pills and fentanyl. I know because my staff has tracked it all over the country for the past 7 years. And I understand that your county, Madison County, has experienced a rise in counterfeit pills. You see it up close. Your deputies probably go through a lot of Narcan. Can you describe what the situation's like in your county?
Well, thank you for allowing me to be here today and participate. First of all, just to describe Madison County, there's 92 counties in Indiana. We're the 14th largest in population, but we are also third out of 92 counties in the number of felony convictions that result from probably 75 to 80% of the illegal drug activity here in our county. So I don't think we're unique, but I just wanted to display some of the demographics. Fake farms, as we call them, counterfeit drugs here in this county have all but pushed heroin use aside. We still have a severe meth problem, very severe, but fake pharmaceuticals have really made an impact here. And we've seen bulk seizures from dealers who either live here or bring their service here. And our intel is that, as was said earlier, across the borders of this country, there are clandestine labs that produce so much of this illegal drug that bulk orders are frequent. And so we're arresting people with 4,000, 5,000 counterfeit pills in their possession on a regular basis.
That's shocking. And is it safe for me to assume that these fake pills, apart from being deadly quite often, because I know the manufacturing of the cartels and others is not great about how much fentanyl they put in them, which is why you end up with these fatalities so often. They're often manufactured so they look just like the real thing. Like, you couldn't look at them and tell, could you?
No, you really couldn't. And we're even seeing new designs and new colors on a frequent basis, because so they're changing the product just about as quickly as we can identify it.
Let me do a question for both of you. And since you're the higher ranking gentleman, Sheriff, you're going to go last. But let me, Mark, in a law enforcement perspective, based upon what you know about what America's law enforcement at both the federal, state, and local level are working with, and the amount of crime just in this area of illicit drugs and counterfeit pills, do you feel like America's law enforcement is currently under-resourced chasing the counterfeits that are out there, or are there enough resources to chase all the investigations that law enforcement could on a daily basis?
So I think the sheriff will agree with me. I don't think there's ever enough resources to address a serious drug problem, and basically all the crimes that I think that are committed out here, from domestic violence, whatever it may be, petty theft, retail theft, all these different crimes, usually drugs is the common thread or common denominator behind a lot of these crimes. And unfortunately, we try to work the other crimes in concert with working these drug investigations, and the resources just aren't there. It's kind of a saying with DEA. We always do more. We try to do more with less, and that's been going on forever, probably with most law enforcement agencies.
Sheriff, is that consistent with what you're experiencing? Do you see? I don't want to say that you are not doing enough, but would it be fair to say that there are enough opportunities that if you had more manpower, that you could actually open many more investigations because of the quantity of what you're seeing in terms of counterfeit drug crime?
Yeah, there's no question. I think the latest job task analysis for a police officer in the state of Indiana identified 475 tasks that police officers are required to perform, some frequently and some not so frequently. But so a lot is being asked of law enforcement today, more than ever before, and I think probably too much. In our county, overdoses have risen extremely sharply the last 2 years. Thereby, overdose deaths have also risen sharply. So the investigative efforts have been overwhelmed. And it's also a very expensive venture if you are investigating these thoroughly. Indiana recently made it a first-degree felony if you are convicted of supplying the illegal drug that took someone's life. So the human factor is it's just so tragic and sad, and that's one giant issue. But again, the cost, the expense, the human resource, training and investigations, it is a very large hurdle for us. We would like to have more resources, but that's probably the same with every governmental agency in the United States.
Well, not every governmental agency is experiencing a wave of counterfeit pills with deadly ingredients. So I think your request might be a little more timely. Thank you both, Mark and Scott, for your time. I'm going to move on to Mac. Thank you for joining us, Professor McCall, Dr. McCall. I have a specific question that I alluded to when I was speaking to Christina, because back in 2013, the state of Maine actually legalized importation of medicine from Canada. And after seeing ads from a Canadian pharmacy in your local paper, you ordered 3 medicines from them. And so I think it's possible that you may be one of the best examples of what importation looks like when a state executes it. So tell me what happened after you did that.
Thank you, Shabbir, for inviting me. Yes, within just weeks of passing that prescription drug importation ordinance, um, several entities that claim to be online Canadian pharmacies began advertising in our local papers. So one of those was a full-page ad, and I contacted them. And I ordered 3 common prescription medications. One of them was Nexium, which is used for heartburn or bleeding ulcers in the food pipe or stomach. And then I ordered Celebrex, which is an anti-inflammatory pain reliever, and Plavix, which is used to prevent harmful blood clots. What was sent to me in packaging was not the brand name, nor was it a generic that is FDA approved. The products sent to me were not approved for use by Canada Health. It was also evident in the packaging sent that the entity that sent the products, that it was not a licensed pharmacy in Canada. When we traced the packaging by mail back to its source, none of the 3 products were from Canada, actually. One was from India, one was from Turkey, and one was from an island in the Indian Ocean called Mauritius. And we have access to an analytical lab here at the School of Pharmacy. So we analyzed the 3 products that were sent, both qualitatively and quantitatively. What we found is that all 3 products were substandard in terms of basically not what your doctor prescribed. For example, the Nexium that's used to treat bleeding ulcers in the food pipe or stomach only had 58% of the labeled dose. The Plavix, which is used to prevent harmful blood clots, had a contaminant in it. And there were previous reports of the same product that they sent me, again, non-FDA approved, non-Canadian Health approved, previous reports in other countries, this product had a carcinogen. So we were concerned about the contaminant we found. So the bottom line is all 3 out of 3 were substandard.
Wow. So that must have been scary for you to think that there were other Mainers who were seeing this full-page ad, seeing these ads, and buying these products at the time. Tell me, since we're all very sensitive right now to issues of shortages and so forth, when you say it's not FDA approved, what that means is that that product was manufactured in a facility where there's no FDA inspectors checking any part of the process, right?
That's right. And that's one of the first steps. But also, the products were never part of our secure drug supply chain, which we often take for granted. But that secure drug supply chain ensures the proper storage and handling of that product throughout the chain, all the way to the patient. So it starts with a manufacturer that's been inspected and has quality control processes, but it goes all the way through until that product is in the hands of the patient.
So I think this might be an obvious question, and but if I were to be taking a blood thinner and it would come in as subtherapeutic with insufficient active ingredient, what am I looking at in terms of as a patient? And would I physically know it? Would I know, if I take the medicine and 10 minutes later you go, I don't feel like it's working. Would that be indicative? And what would be the consequence to me as a patient of taking a subtherapeutic blood thinner?
Yeah, in this case, specifically Plavix, which is used to prevent harmful blood clots, such as heart attack. Unfortunately, the patient would have no idea. Looking at the product, just inspecting it, you wouldn't know. The only way we knew is that we use mass spec, high resolution mass spec, to analyze and quantify the amount of active ingredient. Ordinarily, a consumer wouldn't have any knowledge until an event happened, such as a harmful blood clot because they're not getting what their doctor ordered to prevent harmful blood clots. So, when they have a heart attack or a stroke or other harmful blood clot, unfortunately, until that disaster, that catastrophic event happens in a patient's life, you wouldn't have any idea that your medicine was substandard.
You might even not suspect even after you were in the emergency room with your medical adverse event, I suspect.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
So you order these medicines from this Canadian pharmacy. They didn't come from Canada. I presume that they directly ship from these foreign countries straight to you?
They were shipped via Canada. So it was a circuitous route. So they did go through Canada on their way to my door.
We don't have him here, but I have spoken with a former customs inspector from Canada named Don Bell, who often told me that they don't actually inspect transited shipments. They get to you, you find that they're dangerous for patients to take. I imagine the next thing that I want to see is Maine state troopers rolling into, I don't know, Manitoba or wherever these guys were, putting them in handcuffs and bringing them back to court in Portland, Maine. But I'm guessing that's not what happened.
Well, we shared this information with the Maine Board of Pharmacy and with the Maine Attorney General's office at that time. And in both cases, there is no jurisdiction here. So those entities, those foreign entities, are not licensed by the Maine Board of Pharmacy. So the Maine Board of Pharmacy did not have jurisdiction or authority to intervene. The Maine Attorney General's office also did not have the authority or capacity to intervene because, again, these are foreign entities, and it's not easy to process and extradite foreign entities like this and actually try to take recourse. So both of those channels, in terms of sharing this information, did not move forward.
So would it be fair to say that the Maine law was just based upon the goodwill of Canadian operators? Because doesn't seem like we have any regulatory control. Like the Board of Pharmacy could have possibly issued them a license, but how could it compel them to act in a way that preserves patient safety if they have no jurisdiction over them?
That's right. So the statute that was passed in 2013 in Maine had no oversight, no regulatory oversight.
And what eventually happened to those operators? Are they still around today?
Well, my understanding is that there is a case that has proceeded against those individuals. So no, that website is no longer functioning.
What did it
and
take?
They were never a pharmacy to begin with. They were never a pharmacy to begin with.
But the website said they were a pharmacy.
Right.
So how long did that take from the time that you reported it to the Board of Pharmacy for there to be a case, presumably a federal case, I'm guessing?
Yes, it was a federal case, so it was not handled at the state level. But my understanding is it took several years. I mean, this was not a fast process by any means.
I'm a little alarmed myself at knowing that they operated for years before they were actually pressured to do something. And I've never seen any news about them going to jail. My guess is that nobody went to jail, as often happens in these cases.
Right.
Let's turn a little bit to the topic of drug importation, because I know that it's been debated in the Maine state legislature. There's even maybe a law that passed, I think, 2018 or so about it. And the Maine Medicaid program actually did some research into how much money they could save by buying in bulk drugs from Canada, which Christina and her colleagues would have been unhappy about. But what did Maine Medicaid discover when they started looking at the price savings they would achieve?
So in a public forum, they shared results of an analysis, MaineCare, Maine's Medicaid program. They did an analysis with 50 of the most expensive medications that were selected for consideration for importation. So, and they compared the net cost, the true cost, to MaineCare, to Maine's Medicaid program, not the list price that the manufacturer lists, but the true net cost. They compared that to the price that they would be able to acquire from Canada. And when they looked at all 50 of those, the difference actually would have been, if Maine had started importing these 50 drugs, it would have cost Maine almost $1 million more, cost made more to import those 50 drugs, about $927,000 to be exact.
So, and I'm not sure the Canadians are probably happy about this, but it sounds like what we have here is that Medicaid programs like Maine's get better pricing than Canadian provinces do on their medicines from manufacturers.
It can vary prescription to prescription, but in many cases they do, and that's because state Medicaid programs actually do a very good job negotiating deep discounts off those list prices. But it depends prescription to prescription. In this analysis that Mellinger conducted and reported in a public forum, comparing 50 of the most expensive drugs, the net would have been paying more to import those drugs than we had already negotiated.
It seems to me that once you remove people who already get good discounts like Medicaid or let's say 340B, you've lost a lot of the benefit that might happen to American patients if we do something like Canadian drug importation, even assuming that the Canadians would do without medicine in order to provide us, which I know they don't seem aren't thrilled about.
Right, exactly. And that's what this analysis showed.
Let me ask you one more question before we turn to Andrea, which is, and it's a theme that I saw in the Q&A that's coming in, and it's appropriate. So I'm going to interrupt the flow of conversation to ask it. But if someone says to you, I really need this medicine and I can't afford it, and I'm going to go online and buy it, is a medicine that might actually end up harming you a reasonable option there?
Well, this is a real problem because we know that many patients are struggling to afford medications. And so, I help patients to navigate that. It is good to compare prices between licensed pharmacies. And so sometimes you will find better prices when you compare. And if you're looking online, you need to look for the .pharmacy domain name, which is what the National Associations of Boards of Pharmacy have put in place to help consumers choose safe online pharmacies. So I certainly encourage patients to shop around, to compare prices, but again, to use licensed pharmacies because that's what's safe. You want to get what your doctor prescribed, otherwise there can be real harm. So I definitely encourage, shopping around and looking for the best price.
Right, because a potentially unsafe drug is no help at all.
Exactly.
Thank you, Dr. McCall. Andrea, let's turn to you. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you for having me for this conversation.
I'm very sorry for your loss, but I appreciate your advocacy. I've admired it for a long time. And I would say that since your daughter Ashley's murder by a drug dealer who sold her a counterfeit pill, that tragedy has really motivated you to make a big difference. And I'm struck by how much the crisis has grown. I just read the statistic that counterfeit pills and in general, the current drug death crisis is actually more deadly to people 18 to 39 than even COVID. Is that what you've seen in your area in Colorado?
That is what we've seen. The prevalence of fentanyl deaths, if you could see the faces that came across my desk every day, the amount of people, the families that are losing not only one child, but two children, many family members. It's a crisis that we have to address immediately. I appreciate the way that you described Ashley's situation, because I think it's important to clarify that these counterfeits are causing murder, and that people know that they're purposely made to deceive and to addict, and that these pills can kill.
Yeah. Well, I followed the trial of the gentleman and his family that sold your daughter the counterfeit pill, and the DEA did an amazing job putting it together, and then the DOJ did an amazing job at prosecuting and working their way so that they got a really good sentence out of it. And what we learned from reading the court transcripts is that, this pill was not made in Grand Junction. This gentleman crossed the border, the southern border to Mexico, and purchased these pills and brought them back. And to date, as far as can tell, the people in Mexico that made them have never been brought to trial or even charged. And this, follows the theme that we can only enforce effectively what's in our borders. Have you made peace as someone who might yourself find yourself someday taking medicine imported from another country? Have you made peace with the idea that the person who actually made that pill might never be brought to justice?
Well, as Mark had referenced before, these fentanyl deaths are very hard to prosecute. Extradition of foreign counterfeiters could take years, and it's not likely to happen. Although I won't ever give up hope, the reality is that these members, these cartel members, these counterfeiters, as you referred to them as, may never be brought into the United States for indictment and prosecution. The chances of that are very slim. And if you ask, asking if I'd made peace with this situation, I'm really not even sure how to answer that, because I don't think that I could ever find peace in the fact that people can manufacture and sell these lethal counterfeits, and there is no accountability for them. The idea that somebody can wake up tomorrow without their child, their brother, their sister, because they were deceived by a pill, something so very small, is very disturbing to me.
Have you, as a result of this experience, have you started looking at your prescription drugs that you and your family take differently?
Definitely. We would never take anything that wasn't prescribed to us by a pharmacy, a legitimate pharmacy, a prescription that was not ours. We learned the hard way, with Ashley's death, that these pills, there's no second chance. One and done with these pills. There's not any do-overs, and no one should ever take a pill that isn't prescribed to them. So we can't take any risks with medications that we don't know whether they're safe or not. You have a better chance of surviving a game of Russian roulette with a firearm than you would using one of these counterfeit pills.
I understand. So one of the elements of your advocacy that I admire is that you're organizing the National Day of Fentanyl Awareness and Prevention on August 21st. So how do people get involved and in that day, which I assume is consuming a lot of your time for the organizing for it?
It is. Well, the simplest way would be to go to our website at facingfentanylnow.org. And we're continuously looking for supporters to share our message. And all of our grassroots fentanyl organizations, awareness organizations all over the country are coming together with thousands of affected family members for this day. And our only mission there is to spread awareness on the dangers of fentanyl, to save other people. We wish we would have had someone give us this information before we lost our child. So we're hoping that that's what we can share, and so that it's not too late for your family.
I'm sure it will do good. I unfortunately have run us entirely out of time, so I don't have any time for any more questions. I want to let everybody know that if you go to www.safemedicines.org, you can learn about the counterfeit problem, and the link in the top left corner of the website, you can learn more about Canadian and foreign drug importation, what we've learned from the COVID pandemic and the counterfeit problem, and how that would impact any importation program we would run, and some other statements from Canadian stakeholders and law enforcement and others. Thank you for your time. Again, I am Shabbir Safdar of the Partnership for Safe Medicines. Thank you to the panel. Have a great day, and look for this recording online. Thank you.